If you're a business owner right now, you've probably had that thought, we should be using AI.
But then it's, where do we even start?
What tool? What problem? Is it even worth it?
And that's exactly where most businesses go wrong.
So in this episode, we break that down with Richard and Scott, whose one thing is all about starting with the problem and not the tech.
So before we dive into the what one thing, Scott, Richard, talk to me about the journey or the moment of realization that led you into your what one thing.
For me, my one thing comes from probably the same place the color of this beard comes from, right? Reality is experience. So I spent 25 years in big American SaaS businesses working globally with huge companies. And it was always about how do you maximize the kind of investment you're making in SaaS software, right? And we're talking some of these companies are spending $20-25 million a year on SaaS subscriptions. What I often found was we were a solution looking for a problem. And that for me was like a cardinal sin, effectively. So my one thing is always know your problem before you go and look for your solution. I've developed this idea of kind of a framework over the years, which is people, process, and technology. And I think if you can align those three things against whatever your mission or goal is, you can deliver exceptional results, right? And I think the technology part is the last part. Like that should be the last part. And that's where the solution sits, or the final part of the solution anyway. So I think if you have the right people, you've educated them in the right way, you've given them autonomy or enablement, and you've empowered them, you then have processes that make sense in the context of what you're trying to deliver in reality as well. Like it's fine to write a process down, but does that process actually have an unhappy path and a happy path? You know, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doesn't always go in that order, right? So the reality sits in that process piece. Then if you go from having the right people with the right processes, then it's about finding the right technology to enable them to deliver against whatever that goal is. So that kind of PPT framework for me has always worked really well. Over the years, I've kind of built around that and thought about how do you then do the work to understand those things, and it's define, align, and deliver. So if you bring those sort of the three and the three together, you get this nice 9 box that you can really understand where you sit in your maturity, your completion, your challenges in each of those kind of people, process, and technology areas. And then, and only then, can you really define a solution. And I think solutions that are driven by people with different experiences, opinions, and perspectives are genuinely the best solutions, because you're working from a toolkit rather than having one tool, which is like my perspective, right? So I think solutions built by, not consensus, but by good research, aligned to people, process, and technology, give you the ability to truly solve something in the long term in a very robust way. And what we're seeing with AI is almost the complete opposite of that. Everyone goes, right, here's a 250 person organization. Everybody gets Copilot access. Go for it. We're going to be 10 times more productive, right? And the reality is they're not, because people don't know the use cases to use. Lots of your most conscientious people won't use AI because they're scared of it, right? So I don't want to train it because it's going to replace me, or I don't want to put stuff in there because I think that's going to leak, right? So there's a permission thing, an approval thing that needs to happen from leadership to actually get AI tools embedded into the way that people work. But then training is the thing that, Scott and I agree very heavily on this. We have seen tens, if not hundreds of businesses now who roll out a license and expect miracles. The reality is until you train and approve those methods of working, you won't see those massive gains, specifically not across, a larger organization. You might see it in individuals here and there who are kind of those champions or self-starters. So yeah, the one thing for me is find your problem, find your challenge, find your opportunity, and then go find a solution for it.
So to break this down for small business owner, maybe they've got 30 staff, maybe they've got 50 staff, maybe they've got 100, 150. They've got a lot of problems. Normally lead generation is problem 1, grumpy staff, problem 2, we could carry on. But how do they define what can be solved by AI? And how can they define what a good training provider looks like?
So I think AI is very different to many other technologies we come across, right? I've been doing digital transformations and huge rollouts for a long time. I think AI is the first technology where we provide access and then we encourage experimentation. And actually that's very different to any other technology you ever rolled out, which was, right, you provide access, you give someone the exact process they're supposed to follow, and they know the exact result they're supposed to get. And so I think the challenge with businesses of nearly any size is giving people an indication of the direction to go and how to use it, but actually making the space for experimentation. So you and I may get access to the same tool, Phil, but we may use it in very different ways, right? You're using it for email summaries and writing, prospecting emails. I'm writing it for I'm using it for meeting summaries and defining what a good document structure looks like in an area that I don't know that well. So that experimentation, I think, and how it fits into today goes back to the process piece for me, which is once you understand the process, you then start to understand the capabilities of the AI tools that are in the market and which one adds value in which kind of area of process effectively. How you go about rolling that out very much depends on what your workforce looks like. Are you a workforce of, 30 van drivers, 30 plumbers, 30 accountants, right? That's a very different approach to each of those things. For the van drivers, it's going to be, Gemini AI in Google Maps, right? Route planning. It's going to be some kind of machine learning that gives the way to stack a van most efficiently, plus the route that's the most efficient to deliver against for time, diesel costs, whatever. If you're a set of plumbers, it's probably going to be, how do I get quotes out quicker? Talk to a client. Maybe I record that call. I then have an automated system that goes through that transcript, pulls out all of my standard pricing and builds a proposal that I just have to edit the draft and send, right? If I'm a team of accountants, then actually, the tools are there for meeting transcripts, checking against, legislation in ways that are new, doing research on what has changed since you last ran a chart of accounts for, an import-export business in the UK into Europe, for instance. Those three use cases are so fundamentally different, and the tools that you would use are so fundamentally different. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think what companies are starting to do is just throw a license at it, be that ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or Gemini, and expect huge gains. And that I think is becoming a very, very common fallacy amongst businesses. You will see some uplift in certain places, but you won't see a entire organization be 10 to 20% more efficient through just giving them a Gemini license.
You think it's amazing though that we live in a time where for a relatively small cost, you've got the opportunity to do that experimentation.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you go back even probably like 5 years, if you were looking at implementing tech into your business, that's like a big project. It's cost heavy, it's resource heavy, and half the time you don't get it right anyway because you're trying to do 50 things instead of the 5 things you started out to get to. There's something quite amazing about being able to experiment. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can
Yeah, I
go
wholeheartedly
ahead if you want
agree.
it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think if I look back 10 years ago, if I had the tools that I have at my fingertips today, I was, running teams of 100, 160 people globally. I can see the efficiency we could have put into that. And actually what it would have given me the ability to do is delight and support my customers in ways that we couldn't do at scale at that point in time, right? So, 160 person organization looking after 3,000 clients, that could be 6,000 clients without even breaking a sweat, because most of the knowledge work we do is quite repeatable once you understand the people, the process and the technology that sits underneath it. So yeah, for £20 a month, I spend probably in reality, maybe £220 a month roughly, but I'm a one person business behind the scenes that probably is a team of 4 or 5 people 10 years ago. And so that cost versus benefit is amazing. Plus I'm not having meetings. I don't have to worry about diversification from the mission. It all comes from, a single point, goes into my systems and they enact things for me. I'm a big proponent of human in the loop, never take an AI output and just send it out to somebody. I am the instigator and then the human in the loop. And lots of my things that I used to have to manually do are just happening. That is amazing as a business owner to be able to say that.
So from a granular perspective, business owner, they've got 20 staff, Bob's Widgets, loves a bit of AI. He thinks, I could do with a bit of AI. I think we need this in our business. It's going to make things more efficient. It's going to drive us forward. I don't want to pay £15,000 for a consultant to come in. I'm not sure which road to go down even to look at consultants. I'm not sure what it's going to do. What practical steps can Bobby comes in at 9 a.m. this morning, makes a cheeky cup of coffee, sits at his desk. What's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5 to working out whether he's got a problem AI can solve, documenting it and starting forward on that journey? Does he just gamble and experiment, or does he start with pad and paper? How does he do that?
I'm not a gambling fan. I think you can make very educated guesses. So I would say the number one thing to do is probably invest the $20 a month, £20 a month, whatever it is, pick a tool and then ask that tool questions. So actually you could ask that tool to interview you about your business so it gets context. And the most important thing in AI is context. It will give you a really good output that a junior/mid-level consultant would give you for £10,000. If you were to spend 2 days sitting in a room talking about your business to an AI tool that you had set up correctly so that you're not sharing that data, you're not teaching the LLM based on your responses. I'm a big proponent of be secure in these things, but you could spend 2 days and take more than £10,000 worth of value from those 2 days, I would think. It will give you the use cases. It will give you the possible outcomes. It will give you the tools that you should look at. Always question it, right? Don't take a first response. Always give it a hard time, but it can do those things for you in ways that we have never had the technology access to do before.
So Bob, he grabs his coffee, goes on to Gemini, AI, Copilot, whatever we fancy, and all of them can get a monthly. I'm a big proponent, probably the same as yourself, getting a pro license, because then at least you feel a bit warm and fluffy that if it goes wrong, you've paid something to get some support. And is the very first prompt, how can AI help my business, or ask me questions about my business? How do they go down that journey? And at what point does Bob then need to say, do you know what, it might be worth getting a consultant in now? I can see this value. This is where I'm going to start to talk with an expert.
2 things for me. I think the first question is always not necessarily a question, it's a statement. You are an expert business consultant. You are going to help me figure out where AI can impact my business. That's your role. That's your task that you're giving AI in this instance. You then want to give it context. You want to give it any constraints, and you want to give it what the output needs to be. I would suggest that output needs to be a pretty verbose interview process where you give it all of the context you can ever think of. Because if you sit in isolation and try to think of, these are all the things my business does, you'll miss 40% of what you do, right? I also think there's probably a pre-step to that, which is Bob needs to truly know what everybody does in his business so that the detail he's giving the AI tool is correct, because we, as leaders, we sort of get loftier and loftier, right? And more detached from reality. So truly understanding reality, use the tool to interview, use the tool to give you suggestions, use the tool to then question those suggestions very heavily. And then as far as getting to a consultant perspective goes, I think for me, consultants are becoming a way to shortcut the outcomes, not necessarily always improve the outcomes. Often someone can get to expert status, right? But it takes time. If you bring in an expert, what you're doing is you're reducing the time to value effectively in what you're committing. So that £20 a month, you might pay that for 6 months, and Bob has the time to do this. Bob can work on his business and figure out what it needs to look like. Or Bob can bring in a consultant next week who can then do that in a month. So I think consultants for me are about time, not necessarily access to information, expertise, and outcomes anymore.
So the question I've got with all of this, because it's all sounds great, and there's some really tangible things that you've shared there that you could go away and do. It'd be quite fun to just get ChatGPT in a room and just, talk about everything that's going on in life. Not that I do that at all. But how do you make it not overwhelming? The reality is, as a small business owner trying to grow, and even if you're not trying to grow, even if you're just trying to, just keep going, there's a million things you could look to fix, or a million problems that you've got. How do you take it back to this is the right one to start with so that it doesn't become overwhelming?
I think it comes down to money or time. Most of these outcomes come down to what's costing you money or stopping you making more money, what's costing you a lot of time, or what would free up time to go do something else that can make you more money. As a business owner, really those are the 2 things you trade with, right? Money and time. So I think when it comes to the tool, it's output. And part of the original prompt should be, I want you to help me understand which will be the biggest priority and have the biggest impact on my business using the values of time and money.
So you would even use the AI to do that bit of thinking
100%.
with you that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yep. If you think about it, by the time you've spent, let's say you spend 8 hours over a month with the tool, it's got 8 hours worth of context that you've probably never boiled down to the way that you're giving it to that tool, right? Because most people work in their business, not on their business, is the reality. And so you've invested 8 hours into working on your business. That tool now has all of that context. It can go through and prioritize against any measure you want. It could be that actually you've got a really unhappy staff, right? And you want to improve their experience. You could give it that and say, that needs to be the measure for priority. I don't want to lose my 30 van drivers. All right. So I think it comes down to asking the right questions, but that tool, because it's read everything on the internet ever, has the ability to think like any business consultant you name. So you could say act as a senior KPMG consultant, right? And it will do that. Or you are actually is a better way to do it. But yeah, I think you're taking a really well-read intern You're giving it the detail about your business, which makes it a collaborator to you. And then you're asking it to, be an expert in certain areas and prioritize things in what is important to you. Then that makes it effectively an expert colleague at the same time. I would also ask it to challenge my point of view, as I said earlier, those opinions, perspectives, experiences, right? The variety there is really interesting. But I would say these are the things that I think matter. Challenge me along the way to let's get to the point where we agree what matters for my business, in my context, in my domain expertise.
I really like the idea that Bob sits down, gets his cup of coffee, and he says, okay, we've got 4 hours, whatever GPT, interview me about my business. Then he says, okay, I've got 6 members of staff. Member of staff 1 is going to walk through and start answering questions now. So interview them for half an hour. Because I think that exercise alone, as you say, that's going to produce those systems. It's going to produce those, and then you can start to actually say, right, okay, now you understand the business. Now, what suggestions can you make about AI? I suppose the concern is, how much can we trust AI in this decision process? How much do we believe those answers? Do we then need to get an external group of people to have a look at the case studies or the journeys that we can follow with it?
Potentially. I mean, it's kind of acting like a second brain, isn't it? Because you spent all of that time with it now. You've given it all the context, given it all the information. And it's that second brain now that's got all of that detail there. It all depends on the questions that you're asking it. So I think your question was, can we trust it? Yes and no. So I know that's like the worst answer to give, but you can trust it if you're asking it the right questions and you're giving it the right information and it's got the right context on your business and you haven't missed anything out or your staff haven't lied when they've interviewed them. And then it's no, because AI, like Richard said, is trained on all of the data across the internet. So it's trained on like your academic white papers, it's trained on the Reddit threads and all the horrible keyboard warriors that are in there as well. So it's trained on absolutely everything. So you can't trust it 100% of the time. And with tech as well, you can't trust tech 100% of the time because there's always going to be glitches. There's always going to be issues with it. But what you can do is like we said before, you can give it as much context and information. And as Richard said, context is the most important. And then as long as you're really specific and prescriptive in what you're giving it and what you're asking it, you should then in turn get a more trustworthy output from it. And then when you kind of go into the depths of using AI as well, you start talking about like having knowledge bases and uploading documents to it and master documents and all these things as well. And what the AI can do then is draw information from those documents to give you a more trustworthy answer off the back of that as well. So that's kind of how I would see it. I don't know if Richard, you would agree with that.
I do, absolutely. I think there's a secondary element to trust, which is don't trust it. Like, do you trust a consultant you've never met before who walks into your business and tells you to pivot and sell smaller widgets than larger widgets? The answer is no, right? You're the domain expert. You know your business, you know your customers, you know your market. So always question it is number one for me. And then I think there are tips and tricks you can add to any kind of prompting or interviewing process with AI that allow you to get a better feel for being able to trust it, full stop. And those are things like, don't cite a singular source, right? If you're telling me that there's a use case, I want multiple use cases that show the same thing and have the same outcomes. I don't want a one source reference to an obscure law, right? I want 3 independent sources. We've all seen the very early on lawyers getting caught out of just made up court cases and stuff because they just trusted ChatGPT. So I think for me, there are more advanced prompting techniques and more advanced collaboration techniques with AI that get you to the point where the output is somewhat sanitized and you can trust it more. And to Scott's point, as you give it more and more context, you can ask it to focus more on what you've given it and less on just going out to the World Wide Web and, finding that Billy Bob Thornton on Reddit who, sells gator toenails at $1,000 a gram, right? Like it's not a use case that's probably relevant to a business of accountancy or van drivers. So I think giving it that curation, giving it the challenge, always making sure you are giving it a hard time. Like, you can be really rude to AI. It does not care, right? It's not going to take it personally. All it's going to do is try and make sure it's answering what you want it to answer.
Until there's humanoid robots.
One of the things you'll see is like hallucination and bias are the 2 big things that come up whenever we talk to businesses, right? Businesses care about consistency and quality, ways that individual users don't, right? I'm going to care about creativity and fun and all the things that, you can play with AI and get. But to get consistency and quality, you need to understand how hallucination and bias work. So bias is based on the fact that it is trained on the internet, and the internet is inherently a white, westernized view of the world because that's where the content comes from, right? So it will inherently be biased. It's much better now than it was 2 years ago, right? If you asked for a doctor and a nurse 2 years ago, you got a white, middle-aged male doctor and you got a young blonde nurse. That was the reality. I did that experiment again in a course last week, and actually we got 2 different races and almost a similar age, which is unheard of. It's still male doctor, female nurse, right? But that is the reality. There are far more female nurses than there are male. So that's where bias comes from. Hallucination is a more interesting one. So if you ask a very specific question, so Phil, you say, I'm Phil Davenport, what's my favorite color, right? It won't know that answer unless you've answered that in written form somewhere in an interview, right? But it will take an approximation. So it will find answer A and answer B, and it will try and extrapolate between those 2 things to tell you what Phil Davenport's favorite color is, because that's what you specifically asked it. Now, if I've got access to this picture, for instance, of you right now, it's probably going to guess your favorite color is somewhat on that purple scale, given the logo behind you and the top you're wearing, right? So it's going to infer from what it doesn't know to give you an answer. And that's where hallucination becomes dangerous, because it's done with confidence. And so giving a hard time of like, okay, how do you know my favorite color is purple? Right. And it will then give you its thinking or approximation or sources, and you can challenge those. It's no different for how do I pivot my business to sell more small widgets than large widgets, right? It give you answer A, challenge answer A, get to B, C, D until you are happy that you have enough sources, enough information, and it's understood enough context for that truly to be an accurate answer. Then you can go in action.
So it's really interesting, the whole conversation. There's lots of things to think about. So what we're saying is, to summarize then, we start with the problem, not the tool, and then we build the structure around that. But actually, before you even get to that, you can use the AI tool to help you define what the problem is to begin with, and where you should start in the 100 problems that you've got to solve as a business owner. Which one is the right one to focus on first? That's going to help give you back either time or money.
Yeah. Or increase over those 2 things. I think interestingly,
Yeah.
there's a 2-stage problem there as well, right? So problem 1 is, I know I've got a problem. I don't know what that problem is.
Yes.
Right. So your first purchase is a tool that helps you define more clearly what the problem is. So you're answering a problem like 0.5 before you get to problem 1, which is like, okay, problem 1 is our van drivers are often off sick, they have inefficient routes, and we don't stack those vans well enough, right? Those can be the 3 problems that come out of the research phase of what is my actual business problem.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So Phil and I have started a little experiment this recently about where we are implementing some of the what one things that people have shared on our podcast so far. So we try to implement it over 30 days and see what impact it has, and share different things from it. We're halfway through the first one. This one, I'm really excited to do this one and see where it takes us. If people have enjoyed listening and want to get in touch with you or find out more about what you do and how you can help businesses, where do they do that and how do they connect with you?
They can head over to our website, wearefoundry.ai. They can also follow us on LinkedIn as well. We both have personal LinkedIns where we push out a lot of free information and value, we think. And then also the AI Foundry also has a LinkedIn site on there. But when you go onto the website, you can also join our free community, which is open to, we say it's for business owners, business leaders, but it's open to anyone who really wants to learn about AI, ask questions, not feel scared about asking questions either, and hopefully collaborate and get answers with people who are kind of like-minded in a safe space. So you can head over to there, and we'll be in there as well. We're trying to push as much free value to you as possible, and we'll hopefully see you at some of our events that we're going to put on as well in the coming months.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us.
Pleasure.